So today we are taking some time to think about how we can act more sustainably. We all know that fast fashion is bad and vintage is good. We all know that we should reduce our food waste and that changing our home energy tariff to renewables is a good thing. But did you ever think about what constitutes green hi-fi? Well, I'm glad to say that Andrew and Ed are up next to get us thinking on that very topic. So please welcome Andrew Everard and Ed Selley. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Angela.
And here we are, sweltering on the hottest day of the year, so we don't have to mention climate change. We're feeling it all around us. But something we've never thought about, well, I've never thought about before, you guys obviously have. Can hi-fi ever be green?
Well, you opened up by talking about vintage. The problem is that vintage hi-fi, almost all of it used valves, which produce a lot of heat, and operated at something called Class A, which means the amplifier is using full power even when it's not playing music. In fact, the louder you play the music, the cooler it gets. In the good old days, we used to say, well, that's just an inconvenience and something you live with. But the energy cost, if you can be completely pragmatic about it, the energy cost is getting silly now. I mean, I tested an amplifier a couple of weeks ago, which was pulling 350 watts just on tick over. That's 7p an hour. And a couple of months before that, I reviewed a couple of huge mono amplifiers, which incidentally weighed a quarter of a tonne a piece and were £500,000 for the pair. Their maximum power consumption is 10 kilowatts, so that's £3 an hour, and you need two of them. So that's £6 an hour just for you listening, and they heated the room very nicely, to the extent I had to stop listening because the room was too hot.
So not the best choice for a day like today for sure, and not the best choice looking ahead when we're all trying to be a little bit greener about our choices, not to mention the fact that if you are going to use more electricity, then obviously the fuel prices have all gone up and seem set to keep going up as well. So as well as the environmental impact, we've got an impact on the wallet as well. So talk me through how some things are greener than others, what tech they use or what measures the manufacturers have started taking.
Yes, this is a degrees of sort of pragmatism, if you will. Before you embark on more radical solutions, which we will come to in just a moment, there are a number of things that manufacturers have been doing both through enthusiasm and compulsion over the last couple of years. The big one, and it sounds preposterous in the context of many of the devices we use at home, but it is a relatively recent addition to home hi-fi, is proper energy efficient standby states. When I say energy efficient standby states, quite a few pieces of kit I've tested over the years have gone into a standby mode and a red light comes on the front and all sorts of things, but actually they fundamentally are still sitting at tick over. So a genuine less than 1 watt or indeed less than half watt standby is now something that more and more manufacturers are successfully implementing. This is harder than it sounds with hi-fi equipment. If you've got a socking great big toroidal power supply, there is no sort of half watt method of that sitting in any usable state. So it requires you to have sort of secondary supplies that will allow the main supply to wake up from there. And this significantly reduces your electricity bill because obviously when the unit isn't doing anything, it is consuming a great deal less electricity. Further to that, even more recently, and it must be said in the face of some opposition, although I wait to see if the current situation changes that, a number of pieces of equipment that we see now will also turn themselves off after a given period of time. Now, as recently as 10 years ago, that was an anathema for most manufacturers. Indeed, certain companies still very much develop and design equipment with a view to it being left on all the time, with the commensurate costs in terms of running. But now a number of products, right up to and including many thousands of pounds, will auto standby after a period of time. You can usually, if it really offends your sensibilities, you can turn this sort of functionality off. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a very good thing. You head out, oh, I just need to pop to the shop or something like so on and so forth, and you may have forgotten to switch everything off. You come back and it's successfully turned itself off, and it isn't simply chewing its way through your domestic electricity bill. So things like that can take an existing design and can in turn make it more efficient without having to do anything more significant and more radical. But there are more radical options available beyond that as well.
Just before we go on to the more radical options, though, Ed, for a consumer, if I'm buying a piece of kit, any kit really, if it's got a standby button, I assume it's got standby. But we've all read articles that say standby isn't as environmentally friendly as you think it ought to be. So how do we now know, at this stage in the game, what kind of standby our electrical items are using? Unless we've got a multimeter or going around with the smart meter handset.
Well,
monitoring.
I'm afraid it's not automatically obvious. A number of products that successfully pass the 0.5 watt standby rule, as I believe it is now, will trumpet that on the packaging, because it is a meaningful benchmark to which a product has to pass a series of tests to adhere. Otherwise, I'm afraid it's a bit of a movable feast. In my listening room at the moment, there is a very large amplifier which is entirely capable of running a 0.5 watt standby function, and it has that on the box to mark that out. But then there's also a digital to analog converter which consumes far less power, but actually its standby is 10 watts. So it's less electricity consumed than leaving it on all the time, but it's still nowhere near as efficient as some other products will be. Now, at the sort of many thousands of pounds cost that these products are, it's still going to be a discretionary area for you to choose how important this is for you. But it is possible, if you wish, to choose exceptionally high-performing pieces of equipment at high-end price points, which is considerably more efficient than products that notionally compete in the same price point. And that information is available if you ask the manufacturers in a fairly insistent way. They will eventually usually cough to their standby figures if you ask them nicely or indeed enough. So yeah, you can find out, but often it's not that easy.
I can see a new category about to appear on the Sound Advice website at this rate, so that we can all check what kind of power consumption things have got. You also mentioned going more radical. Andrew, Ed, what are you talking about when you mean more radical?
Well, there is one well-known hi-fi manufacturer that doesn't even have a power switch on the front of its products. And we all got very excited when they launched a product which had a standby power supply. So that operates the standby, and then when you actually start playing music, that switches off and the big power supply switches on. Now, when we all said, well done, you're going green, they said, no, that's not why we did it. Apple require us to do it. Because the product has Apple AirPlay, it has to be kept powered up. That's the only reason they did it, not for environmental reasons, but to keep Apple happy. Anyway, it is possible to get more efficient amplification in amplifiers. I mean, it's the power amplifier section in an amplifier that uses all the power. And Class D, which some people think means digital, but in fact doesn't, has been developed for a long time. It's always been a thing that real audiophiles said sounds rubbish and it sounds digital because it's digital, but it isn't. But it's now got very good, and to the extent that some high-end manufacturers are choosing it, it used a lot less energy. You look at NAD products, you look at some more recent Marantz products, they all use these Class D amplifiers from a company called Hypex, who are based in Holland, and they've really developed this stuff, and it's as good as the old-fashioned energy-hungry amplification.
Okay, now we are nearly out of time, so very quickly, either of you, do you think there's much more manufacturers can do?
There is one more way of being more efficient, which is to consider your system as a whole. You will note on our speaker reviews on the website, they will list the sensitivity of the device, which is the amount of noise it can produce at 1 meter from 1 watt of input power. And if you look at the different reviews we've got, that varies dramatically. If you have sensitive loudspeakers, you don't need a lot of power to drive them, which in turn means that you can use an amplifier that develops less power. And it can do that in a way which may not be as environmentally friendly as the Class D technology that Andrew was talking about, but it's using sufficiently small amounts of power that it's less important. This is a different way of going about things, and it does require you to think, I'm going to have to use the word holistically. It requires you to think both about your speakers and your amplifier at the same time. But if you do make these choices, you can enjoy amplifier technology that you are perhaps more comfortable with, more familiar with, but you're using much less power whilst you do it. So I think we've started to see a number of these lower powered sort of desktop and small footprint amplifiers, and I think this is going to be something we're going to see more and more of, because it is a perfectly valid way of constructing a system which is still green, but perhaps doesn't offend sensibilities, and is more reassuring for you on a long-term basis.
Brilliant. We have no more time for a deeper discussion, but I look forward to maybe some articles appearing on Going Green with Hi-Fi very soon. Andrew and Ed, thank you so much for joining me.